G20 summit in Toronto next week, right? The leading economic powers of the world and the expanded group. There will be a commentary by me on Russia Today that will be posted by the time you hear this broadcast. We know that Obama's going in there with an agenda. He wants to not to discuss the German anti-speculation measures. Obama urges Europe not to drop stimulus measures yet. The Chinese government saying, but out of our currency management, the German ban on naked credit default swaps, various Tobin tax measures, anti-hedge fund, anti-derivatives measures coming out of Europe. You can get my take on that, the preliminary take, by looking at the website. Can't go into it now because we do want to go back to de Gaulle. Now, de Gaulle is a dirigist. This is a school of economics to which I belong. Mercantilists, protectionists, dirigists. And dirigism is the most successful economic school. This is not the free market, not the Austrian school, the Chicago school. It's not Marxism either. Quite distinct. It's based on the American system of Henry Clay, and it's also based on the German historical school of political economy founded by Friedrich List. And this is the tradition of de Gaulle. There's also an indigenous French school going back to Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Colbert, the real one, who was a big influence on Alexander Hamilton and therefore on the United States. Now, dirigism. Let's hear from de Gaulle on this 70th anniversary of his courageous anti-fascist, anti-Nazi stand, because that's another important plus, to put it mildly. De Gaulle says, how do you organize the economy of France? For us, and I'm quoting now, the task of the state was not to force the nation under a yoke, but to guide its progress. However, though freedom remained an essential lever in economic action, this action was nonetheless collective. It directly controlled the nation's destiny, and it continually involved social relations. It thus required an impetus, a harmonizing influence, a set of rules which could only emanate from the state. This is now dirigism. It's based on the theory of indicative planning by Jean Monnet, the foundation of Europe. It comes out of the Marshall Plan and the early years of the European coal and steel community. The French had a commissariat of the plan that would establish broad national priorities. That is to say, indicative planning, a list of 5 or 10 important things you want to do. And how do you get there? This is not the micromanagement of the Soviet Gas plan, which tried to manage everything down to the last bolt. Here's what de Gaulle goes on to say. In practical terms, what this new economic policy primarily amounted to was drawing up the national plan. In other words, deciding on the goals, the priorities, the rates of growth, and the conditions that must be observed by the national economy, and determining the fields of development in which it must intervene, and the laws and the budgets. It is within this framework that the state increases or reduces taxation, eases or restricts credit, regulates customs duties, that it develops the national infrastructure, roads, railways, waterways, harbors, airports, communications, new towns, housing, and so forth, that we harness the sources of energy, electricity, gas, coal, oil, atomic power, initiates research in the public sector and fosters it in the private sector, that it encourages the rational distribution of economic activity over the whole economy, and by means of social security, education, and vocational training, facilitates the changes of employment forced on many Frenchmen by modernization. In order that our country's structures should be remolded and its appearances rejuvenated, my government, fortified by that newfound stability of the state, was to engage in manifold and vigorous interventions. Now that's de Gaulle writing in his memoirs, Memoirs of Hope, which is it's the renewal is a multi-volume group of memoirs. This is his description of the economic guidelines of what he did in France after 1957-58. And again, the fruits of that are visible to anybody. You go to Paris, they have the best municipal transportation of any large city in the Western world. They've got the fastest TGV, the best fast train network. They've got the highest proportion of their electricity coming from nuclear energy of any of the European countries. Indeed, they're practically carrying the rest of continental Europe with their nuclear energy production. Why is it that they can be competitive with the Airbus, which is basically a French-centered operation? It's the Dassault Sud Aviation. All of this promoted by de Gaulle's dirigism. This is the story of economic success. This is the way you get things done. And as you can see, this is not about monetarism. He doesn't talk about money supply. He's not focused on cash flow and all this stuff. You heard it. Roads, railways, waterways, harbors, airports, communications, new cities. When was the last time you heard that? Housing. Obviously, the labor market plays a big role. The question of advancing towards full employment. And if there is technological unemployment, retraining and making adequate provision for the transition into new modes of production. Now, this is one of the great success stories of the modern world. In my book, de Gaulle is on the list of the four or five really great figures of the 20th century, along with Dr. Sun Yat-sen of China, Ataturk of Turkey, Franklin D. Roosevelt of the United States, and de Gaulle. And I guess we should have a fifth category for the non-aligned, for people like Nehru, Sukarno, Nkrumah, Tito, and the rest of the movement there from Bandung, and Nasser, of course. Nehru, Sukarno, Nkrumah, Tito, Nasser, from Bandung to Belgrade in the 50s and 60s, the founders of the non-aligned movement. Let's give them honorable mention. But other than that, it's Sun Yat-sen, Ataturk, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and de Gaulle, the nation builders, the people who have created nations and national economies, right? This is what they were concerned about. And notice the constant stress on national pride, not the carping denigration, not the endless sniping negativism, the scoring of debaters' points, the wedge issues, and all the rest of us. This is a figure of great historical grandeur. And it was, again, 70 years ago that he took this courageous stand when most French leaders, certainly the entire political class, was figuring out how they would prosper under Nazi occupation. And that was Pétain and Laval and so many others. De Gaulle said no. And his demand for national independence extended into the 1950s, into the 1960s, all the way until the destabilization of him by the CIA using narcotics and many other tools, playing the Vietnam War and profiting from mistakes that he made out of excessive, really loyalty to the U.S. within the alliance. He was then ousted in 1970, but he still had time to go through his memoirs. Now, this is therefore dirigism, and this is, again, it's not the free market lunacy. It is not the suffocating, stifling economic dictatorship of the Gosplan. It is indicative planning. It is not prescriptive planning. It doesn't tell you where every bolt is going to be at every step in the production process, but it says what are the main tasks and how do we do them. This is what has been done in Japan under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. You can see the book by Chalmers Johnson on the Japanese MITI. I would also add the Taiwan experience under Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China. This gets its own special category. President Chiang Ching-kuo responding to the oil crisis with a program of national priorities, and so forth. And this is far better than the state-dominated command economies. They cannot compete with this. And, of course, it's far better than the absolute lunacy, and this is the worst, of course, is the IMF monetarist orgy of Jeffrey Sachs, the shock therapists, and the rest. So that's the historical track record. So de Gaulle, great man, great anti-fascist, great anti-Nazi, great economist, and that's what we need today. De Gaulle, the economist. So salute to de Gaulle on the 70th anniversary of the 18th of June, 1940, and we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio. Keep up with Tarpley.net for the word on the G20 summit coming next week.